70-742 Lesson 15, Installing and Configuring Active Directory Rights Management Services. That's RMS. This will be our last lesson in 70-742, but perhaps one of the most important. What is Rights Management Services? In this lesson, we're going to be looking at understanding what rights management actually is, installing a license or a certificate, RMS server, managing connection points, client deployment, how we might support mobile devices, managing RMS templates, what exclusion policies do, and then finally how we back up and restore ADM RMS. So let's get into it. Active Directory Rights Management Services is a type of DLP, data loss prevention. The intellectual property that organizations create are critical components to how that organization runs. The documents that are developed, the PowerPoints, the spreadsheets, this is all critical information on the lifeblood of that company, the development of new technologies or how certain processes are performed, or it could include personal information, account information, lots of different types of critical information that needs to have some type of control mechanism behind it. Well, ADM RMS it's a technology, and it allows us to provide that extra level of security to documents like email or Microsoft Office documents, even web pages. And it does it by using encryption to limit who can access a document or web page. And then what can be done with that document or web page. You can limit a document or web page and specify, can it be printed? Can it be edited? Can you forward it? Can you delete it? Or do you only have the rights to view it? And we'll take a brief look at how that's implemented. RMS helps contain confidential information so it stays within the organization and helps limit who can access that data. That's how organizations can use this mechanism to help stay in control of their intellectual property. So when we define security in our Windows domain, we're defining the basic rights and permissions. Rights are what a user or a group can do on a system. The example they give is backup operators can back up files even if the user or group does not have the permissions to the file or folder. Rights may also define who can shut down or reboot a computer, who can log onto a computer, and so on. They're what you can do. And those rights are defined using GPOs. Permissions specify what you can do with an object. For example, NTFS permissions are used to specify who can access and read a file, who can modify, who can delete a file, and who can manage the file. Understand those differences between rights and permissions. Now, while rights and permissions, they're powerful tools, they give us a lot of controls, they have limitations. For example, anyone who can access and read a file protected with NTFS can also copy that file to USB, email a file, print a file. This is what we call exfiltrating data. With that in mind, how easy is it to steal, copy, or remove confidential information? ADM RMS, it's information protection technology. It's used to minimize unauthorized transmission of data or inadvertent leakage of that data. And it's specifically with Microsoft products and operations. So it can tie in very tightly with Microsoft Exchange, Microsoft SharePoint, and of course Microsoft Office. How does it work? Well, to control access, it encrypts the data, the file or email. To be able to read the file, you need to be able to have the encryption key to decrypt the file. It's as simple as that. And that gets stored on the RMS server. As a user opens or accesses the file, she or he automatically retrieves the key from the RMS server and opens the file. Now, understand that those Microsoft products, they're all RDMS aware. So they can also help limit what you can do with a document. And that's as specified within the rights assigned using rights management. So even if someone copies the file to a USB and takes it out of your network or emails it to someone, whoever attempts to open the file still needs to be able to access the ADRMS to get the decryption key. If they don't have the rights, they're not able to view it. The file stays encrypted. How do we implement this? Well, after we install an ADRMS server and we configure it, and the clients are configured to use it, whenever they go to access those secure documents, the decryption of the document, it happens transparently. They don't even realize that it's occurring. And in addition, when we're using applications that are aware of ADRMS, it's very easy to be able to secure a document or an email. We use an ADM RMS server, and that is a Windows server that's part of our domain. And we publish the location of that server to our domain services. And it becomes known as a service connection point. An ADRMS client is a computer with the ADMRS client. This could be all the way back to Windows Vista and up, 7, 8, Server 2008, and so on. Now, understand that even if it is a computer running XP, Server 2003, or Server 2003 R2, you can download an ADRMS client and install it, but hopefully you're not running any of those systems anymore. What is an ADRMS enabled application? Well, it's an application that allows users to create and consume ADRMS protected content. This might be Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Outlook, ADRMS root certification cluster. So this is the first server that you deploy in a forest. It's going to manage all licensing and certification traffic for the domain in which it's installed. Now, that configuration information is installed in a Microsoft SQL database. Those root certification clusters are typically found in large branch offices to distribute licenses that are used in content consumption and publishing. Now, you can also have a licensing only cluster. It's an optional component that's not part of that root cluster. However, it relies on the root cluster for certification and other services. It only provides publishing licenses and use licenses to users. It's typically used to support our RMS requirements of a department or to support rights management of external business partners. Now, understand these different types of certificates and licenses that are required for it to be able to operate. You've got the server licensor certificate, and it contains the public key that encrypts the content key in a publishing license. You've got the ADRMS machine certificate, the rights account certificate, template rights account. There's many different types of accounts and certificates. Make sure you read through and thoroughly understand. And then understand the 8 steps shown of how a document's protected and then accessed using RMS. Now, that ADM RMS deployment, it is one or more servers, and it's known as a cluster. Even if it's just a single server, it's still known as a cluster because of the fact that you can add additional servers for scalability. So you can have a single server cluster but it is there for additional growth. If you're in a large enough environment, you're going to use a dedicated SQL server. Now, I did the lab, and what I did was I followed the instructions in the lab, and in that we used the WID, the Windows Internal Database. If you deploy AD RMS in a single forest, you have a single AD RMS cluster. If you're going to have multiple forests that you're working with, each forest has its own root cluster. So understand that only one root cluster can exist in an ADDS forest. Now, like I stated, we used the WID, the Windows Internal Database, for our test environment. If you're doing this in production, you're going to use a dedicated SQL server. And that's specifically if you're going to have more than one server. Don't ever deploy this role to a domain controller. Remember, domain controllers should only be domain controllers. That's all they should do. We've done a lot of different various roles on our servers because we're working in a test environment. Don't do that in a production environment. Once you've installed AD RMS, you're going to be using the console, the Active Directory Rights Management Service console, to manage it. And when you open it up now, the first time you open it up, there's not a lot of data there, but you're going to be creating the super user. You're going to be creating rights policy templates. You may be creating exclusion policies. Now, remember earlier I indicated that a service connection point gets created? Well, here you can see it's an object in Active Directory that holds the web address of the AD RMS certification cluster, and it got defined during our installation. Any AD RMS enabled application uses that service connection point to find the AD RMS service. Now, to be able to use this service, you have to have the AD RMS client. And as we've discussed in the very beginning, if you're running Microsoft Vista or any newer Windows operating system, you've already got it. It's built into the operating system. So let's take a look at a document on my system. Okay, so here is our worksheet for Lab 13. If you go to the backstage and you click on, by going to File, this is the backstage. We click on Info, and this is RMS Aware. I can select Protect Document, and there's a couple basic settings you're always going to have, but this is where the RMS comes in. Currently, this has unrestricted access. I could list it as restricted. However, there's additional ones because I'm part of Broward County Public Schools. Confidential or confidential view only. These are defined in the templates. That's how that's done. Okay, back to our lesson. So let's take a look at that if I create a new document. And I've created a new blank document, and as you can see here, if you go in and you select that option to protect, and I say I want to restrict access, and I want to make it restricted access, well, here we are. I can select who can read. I have the rights to grant this. Who can change the document? What users? I can give everyone in the organization change access. Here's additional options. Here's that same view you see on your textbook. And obviously I'm the creator, so I have full control. Well, I can say that permissions for users may expire at a certain point. I can determine whether they can print content or not. There's a lot of control that you can give this. So let's go ahead and cancel out of that. We're not going to create that document. That's how that works. Now you say, well, we've got a lot of mobile devices in our environment. How does AD/RMS support mobile devices? Well, it only supports those devices running Windows mobile operating systems such as Windows Mobile 6 and above. So I would say that it does not move much into the mobile market. Okay, so managing templates. What's a policy template? We also call this an RMS template. It's a right policy template. And this is what we use to enforce the rights that a user or group has on rights protected content. They allow you to standardize the implementation of policies across the organization. Understand that one template may be used on documents to grant view-only rights, which block the ability to edit, save, or print. If used with Exchange Server, that's for your email, you can configure the template to block the ability to forward or reply to a message. What do those templates look like? Well, let's take a look. Here's the Active Directory Rights Management Console. And here you can see a read-only template that I defined. And as you can see, it's read-only access. And that's defined right there. And how does that work? Well, user rights right here has been assigned to operations, this user, and they only have the view option. Edit, save, export, print, forward, reply. None of those options are selected. This is for read only. That's how that template gets defined. And as you just saw on that list, those rights are full control, view, edit, save, export, which is save as, print, forward, reply, reply all. Of course, those would be Exchange Server options. Extract, allow macros. Well, hopefully not too many people are allowing macros. That's a cyber issue that I talk about in cybersecurity. View the rights, even to be able to view the rights that are assigned or edit the rights that are assigned. We can also use those templates to configure documents with content expiration. When does the content expire? Have a license expiration, so the content doesn't expire, but the license might. So what that means is that when that license expires, if you need to view it, you need to acquire a new license. Enable users to view protected content using a browser add-on. So that allows content to be viewed using a browser add-on. So that would be applicable for a user who doesn't have an AD/RMS aware application. You might specify that a new use license is required each time content is consumed. Consuming content means viewing it, accessing it. And a revocation policy. And here are those steps for creating one of those policy templates. Same as what we just saw in that finished template. If you subsequently go in and update a template, the protected documents using the template also get modified. And that template change occurs when the license is acquired. So if those EULs are configured not to expire, and the user who's accessing the document already had a license, the user might not receive an updated template. So be very careful with how you work with that. Now, if you create a template and you apply a template, it's recommended not to delete those templates. If you delete a template, any document that uses the template, it's going to become inaccessible to everyone except members of the super user group, and you'll have learned about the super user group earlier in this lesson. Instead, it's recommended that you archive templates instead of deleting them. You can configure what's called exclusion policies, and these allow you to specify which user accounts, client software, and applications are automatically denied access to RMS. Well, that means that it doesn't apply to them. You can specify a minimum version, and we do this in the lab if we're in our classroom environment. And you can specify what's the minimum version of the application and what's the maximum version of the application as well. And we can see that right here, and you can see that the exclusions for PowerPoint, so PowerPoint won't be applied to RMS, and the minimum version is 14 and the maximum's 16. And then finally, we need to make sure that we're backing up RMS. If we have to implement disaster recovery procedures, we need to know that we can restore our ADRMS. The best way of recovery is to have a backup of the environment which you can restore. So if you're first off, if you're working in a multi-server cluster, you've got that. So if a server goes down, you can stay up with the other servers in your cluster. However, we still need to have disaster recovery in place. If the RMS server and any remote database servers are on a virtual machine, you can back up that VM using Windows Backup with Hyper-V. So that's another way. Now, if you don't have that implemented, you'll have to back up all related machines with Windows Backup. That includes the system state and all the databases. At worst case, you may have to recreate the entire RMS system from scratch. Always plan for worst case. If you don't plan for the worst possible scenario, you'll never be prepared when even an intermediate scenario occurs. Understand you need to have at least these three databases: the configuration database, the directory services database, and the logging database. Now, if you're going to back up those databases, you can use Windows, or hopefully you're not running the WID, the Windows Internal Database, because if you're on production, it's highly recommended you're using a SQL Server. If so, you can use SQL Server Management Studio to back those up. Additionally, make sure you understand that if you have to recreate a new cluster, you're going to have to delete the existing service connection point out of Active Directory. And you're going to need to do that in Active Directory sites and services. All right? So in this lesson, we learned about how the Active Directory Rights Management Service is a technology that's used to provide an additional level of security to documents, such as email, Microsoft Office documents, and web pages. And it does this through the use of encryption to limit who can access a document or web page and what they can do with that document or web page. After we install and configure our ADRMS server, and the clients are configured to use that server, when accessing secure documents, the decryption of a document occurs transparently. The users are not prompted for a decryption key. It's seamless. The primary tool to manage our ADRMS is using the Active Directory Rights Management Service console. And we took a look at that. When you open the console, you're going to see the cluster name, the intranet, the cluster, external cluster URLs, and location of the databases. Let's take another look at that. This is your first page right here. This looks very similar to the cluster view that we saw when we did our different types of clustering. So you can see the cluster name, the type. You can see the current number of servers in a cluster. We've only got one. those URLs. Members of the super users group are granted owner use licenses when they request a use license from the cluster. It allows the members to decrypt all AD/RMS protected content published by the cluster. Super users can decrypt all if they're a member of the super users group. The service connection point is an object in Active Directory that holds the web address of the AD/RMS certification cluster, and it was defined during the installation of AD/RMS. Our AD/RMS enabled applications use that service connection point to find the service. If you're going to have clients using RMS, those clients must run the AD/RMS client, and that's been built into Windows Vista and newer operating systems. If you're going to utilize it in, hopefully not, but if you're going to utilize it in Windows XP or Server 2003 or Server 2003 R2, you have to download and install the client. Now understand that by default, Active Directory Rights Management Service does not service requests from users whose Rights Account Certificate, that's an RAC, was issued from a different server. Remember, one cluster, one forest? Rights policy templates, also known as RMS templates, are used to enforce the rights that a user or group has on rights protected content. We took a look at that. They allow you to standardize the implementation of AD/RMS policies across your organization. And then finally, exclusion policies allow you to specify which accounts, client software, and applications are automatically denied access to AD/RMS. This also allows you to specify the minimum version and a maximum version, if necessary, of the AD/RMS client software. Thank you for reviewing Lesson 15 in 70-742.